Hey guys, this is Dr. Cash coming in on Snow Apocalypse Round 2. A quick little review video on economic policy. This will be in lieu of having class with you guys, and hopefully you've been following along on the Remind 101 messages as well to get you online with the different things that we would have been doing if we had school, but luckily for you guys, we've had a little bit of a break. So what I'm going to try to do tonight, this is actually in reference to chapter 17. So this is actually some of the stuff that we would have completed last week, would have spilled over a little bit into this week, and we would have started with domestic policy and with public policy about midway through this week too. So some of the assignments, if you go to the wiki page and look at 5.1 and 5.2, those kind of span from last week and this week. So anyway, I'll touch back on those a little bit later during the time that we have together. So I'm going to try to go through this as quickly as I can. I know that this stuff can be super dry, so I'm going to try to talk about it in a way that's as simple as I can make it. There's a lot of different factors, but one of the things that I do want you to refer back to for this unit with overall public policy is the Quizlet that I've put on my Unit 5 wiki page at the very bottom. A lot of terms there, but it's all the chapters for this unit together. It's not just economic policy. So overall, a couple of the goals that I want you to keep in the back of your mind on what you're wanting to achieve with this unit is when you think about the theories of market economics, you have laissez-faire, you've got Keynesian economics, and then you have supply side. We're going to talk a little bit about how the national budget is prepared, how it's passed into law with Congress, and how they attempt to balance the budget. We'll talk a little bit about tax policies, explain why tax reform is kind of difficult. Then we're going to talk about some different ways that the government tries to control spending. We'll talk about incremental budgeting. Also want you to keep in mind, as you're doing your readings from JANDA, the origins of income tax, and then keep in the back of your mind, I guess, or maybe I should say pull out from the back of your mind, that the opposing perspectives of majoritarian versus pluralist perspectives when it comes to politics, what we've already talked about. I want you to put that in the context of economics now. So think about tax policies and inequality. But we'll come to that at the very end of our time tonight. So here we go. All right, laissez-faire. I had introduced this to you in class just to say that this is kind of the hands-off perspective on how government should not be involved with the economy. It should just let things happen, let things occur as they occur. Kind of the mindset of survival of the fittest, maybe a natural selection that if government economies are not thriving, that they should die out, that the government should not get involved. They should just let it die. If a business is not doing well, just let it die. I guess I should say that if you didn't complete last Thursday's activities in class of the different Khan Academy videos, looking at the Hans Rosling video, checking out the Poverty Line website, if you haven't done that yet, it's going to be a little bit more difficult for you to have a place to put some of the things that I'm going to be talking about during this video. So make sure that you've done that first. If you haven't done that, just pause me, make sure that you've taken care of those first, and then come back when you have some time to really understand what I'm talking about. But anyway, with laissez-faire, I want you to think about an absence of government control. So if you think about mainstream economists today, they would generally agree with laissez-faire attitude, but they would admit that there needs to be some type of government control because governments can sometimes improve market outcomes. When Adam Smith, this guy from Scotland, wrote a book in 1776 called The Wealth of Nations, he talked about this invisible hand that comes in and it guides the economy. So this non-governmental hand dictates what happens with some businesses. Some businesses succeed, other businesses don't, but it's not the government that does that. It's laid back as far as the government is concerned. Okay. The opposite perspective from this would be a Keynesian school. So you have this guy named John Maynard Keynes. Some people pronounce his name Keynes. And in 1936, he writes this book called The General Theory. And in The General Theory, he focuses more on how business cycles stem from imbalances between aggregate demand, so this would be the total demand for a product or for a service, and the product capacity, or one of your vocab terms, the gross domestic product, the GDP. And what Keynes was saying was that governments can stabilize the economy by controlling the level of aggregate demand. Excuse me. So if the government can control how much of something is available, then the demand goes up, or if the if the supply is controlled, the demand can go up, and so the economy can be regulated as far as that goes. And in class, I think I gave the example of a farmer wiping out some of their crops so that the demand for that supply increases. Okay, so I guess in general you could say that capitalist countries today have widely accepted this theory of economics. In 1946 in the United States we have an Employment Act, and in this Employment Act a Council on Economic Advisors was created in the JANDA. I think they abbreviate it as the CEA. The opposite perspective from this, if I go back to that laissez-faire attitude, a reaction to the Keynesian school of economics was something that is today called the Austrian school. And this is something that actually has its roots before John Keynes. But with the Austrian school, the guy that started to speak out in opposition to that school was a guy named Friedrich Hayek. And what the Austrian school says is that individuals alone, their actions underlie all economic phenomena. So individuals should have the choice. Individuals should be driving the economy. It shouldn't be the government that decides to intervene, but it should be the civilians, the citizenry of a nation. And I wish I had these books right here that I could hold up and show you. I have them in my classroom. I have Wealth of Nations. I have The General Theory, and then I have The Road to Serfdom, which was the book that Hayek wrote in 1944. So if you're interested in this, just look on my back shelf below the teapot, and you'll see the economics section of books there. Okay, something else that you can check out before you even go back to school on Monday. If you do a search for Bastiat's broken window theory, just go to Google, go to broken window theory. You'll see sort of the Austrian perspective on why it's not a good idea, why they would say it's not a good idea to follow what John Maynard Keynes was saying. The government should regulate the economy. Okay, so if we go on kind of chronologically with these different perspectives, the Austrian school has been very popular in the United States since the 1970s, and especially with President Reagan. It kind of had this spark again in the 2012 election. You had this Keynes-Hayek debate between Obama and between Mitt Romney. So with Obama, he was talking about how the auto industry should be bailed out. There should be regulation. That would definitely be John Maynard Keynes. And then you had Romney saying, let Detroit go bankrupt. That would be more like a Hayek perspective, that the government should not get involved. And if you go to my wiki page, you look under section 5.1, you'll see the dueling economists, the fear the boom and bust, and then you'll see round 2. Check that out. It's pretty funny. You see the rap battle that I was talking about. Some of you already saw it on Thursday. Okay, so anyway, from there we have this thing that's called supply side economics. If you've ever heard of the Chicago School, this would be kind of like Adam Smith, even Alexander Hamilton, where they would say that that there should be certain actions if the government's going to take action. There should be certain things that they do to deregulate the economy so that there is a stimulus, or kind of like a resuscitation. So this would be something, if you've ever heard of Reaganomics or trickle-down economics, this would be that if the government were to have wide tax cuts, and this is what happened in the Economic Recovery Act of 1981, Economic Recovery Tax Act of 1981, where there were tax cuts, there were cuts in spending for social programs, there was deregulation, and so the theory is that if that kind of scared me right there. I think I'm okay. The upper wealthiest class were to experience tax breaks, then that would trickle down, where there would be more jobs created. This is intended to increase defense spending and other types of spending. As far as how this worked out, it worked out as expected. Inflation dropped 13% in 1981, from 13 in 1981 to 3 in 1983. As far as the federal deficit, it didn't really change, but businesses were deregulated. Okay, now another perspective would be monetary policy. And so, with monetary policy, if you've ever heard of Milton Friedman, with monetary policy, the idea is that the government can control the economy performance just simply by regulating how much of the nation's money is put into supply. So the organization that was created for this would be the Fed, or the Federal Reserve. And there's a really good book that's called The Creature from Jekyll Island, that kind of it portrays the start of the Fed as it's actually very dystopian, as this creature, this monster that was designed to regulate the nation's economy, but it portrays the creation in a way it reads kind of like a novel, so it's a lot more interesting than it might sound. Anyway, the Fed was created with three goals. So they're going to maintain inflation, they're going to maintain maximum employment, and they're going to make sure that the interest rate is moderated, is kept at a certain rate. Okay, something that you might come across in your agenda readings is the Frank Dodd Financial Reform Bill, and this was supposed to give the Fed even greater powers to regulate large, complex financial firms. And the way that the Fed will control monetary supply is by taking money out of circulation. They can raise interest rates. They can buy securities. They can set federal fund rates. They have a lot of different tools in their arsenal. As far as the president's role in all of this, the Fed is under the executive branch. So, at least on paper, it looks like the president, being the head of the executive branch, is formally responsible for the state of the economy, and we as voters definitely hold the president accountable. But really, it's not the president that determines the interest rates. That would be the Fed. And it's not the president that controls spending, because that's who? Congress. Very good. I'm glad you remember that. It's Congress that would regulate or would control that spending. So the president has a very important role in that he does oversee that position of the Fed chairman. And we just, as of February the 3rd, have a new Fed chairman. The previous Fed chairman, you may have heard of this guy before, it was Ben Bernanke. The new Fed chairman is Janet Yellen, and Janet Yellen would be the first female Fed chairman that we've ever had in the United States. So if you do a Google search, you'll see lots of articles about her stepping in. But the Fed chair is the person who is going to oversee the overall economic policy of the United States. Okay, moving on here. Let's talk for a minute about how public policy and the budget is regulated. Up until 1921, this was something that Congress had sole responsibility with. In 1921, the Budget and Accounting Act was created, and what this is, it established the Bureau of the Budget. Now, we don't have a Bureau of the Budget today. Instead, it's called the Office of Management and Budget, sometimes abbreviated as OMB. And the OMB is the office who would prepare the president's budget. It gets submitted to Congress, and then Congress in January approves the president's budget. So that's kind of the way that it goes. If they want to make any adjustments, then they're able to do that. And the way that they do that, there's different departments inside of Congress, and the House and the Senate, and they're able to do that. So in the House, they have the Ways and the Means Committee, and the Senate, there's the Finance Committee, and they would make commentary or make suggestions back to the president if they had some type of concern on the Office of Management and Budget's proposal to Congress. Okay, let's go on to talk about, because the president's role is not as direct, other than submitting the proposal of the budget, there are some serious problems about the budget process. And one of those problems would be that it's extremely complex. When we talk about how something is approved in Congress, if you think back to the congressional process and how a bill becomes a law, it's kind of the same deal with how a budget is accepted. The other big problem is that you don't have one main person that's responsible for the budget as a whole. And so sometimes the president will point fingers to Congress. Congress might point fingers to the Fed chairman. The Fed chairman is going to point the finger back to the president. And so you just have this cycle that becomes pretty problematic. So there is a budget committee, though, that's supposed to oversee and supervise comprehensive review of the process, and this is called the Congressional Budget Office, the CBO. So you'll come across that in your agenda reading as well. There has been some times that Congress has tried to regulate this entire mad process, and so in 1990 we have the Budget Enforcement Act, and this was supposed to define exactly what spending meant as far as mandatory, what was definitely needed, what was discretionary. There was also in 1997, Clinton tried to pass the Balanced Budget Act, the BBA, and this was to lead to a balanced budget. It even produced a surplus, actually, when it was passed. There's also something else you'll come across called the Gramm-Rudman Holdings Balanced Budget Act and the Emergency Deficit Control Act, 1985. This was a complete failure. Didn't pan out the way that it was expected. The deficit targets were eliminated in 1990, and even in 2011, we tried again with the Balanced Budget Act, but it didn't pass either. So this is something that you'll hear in the next presidential election. You'll hear the candidates say they're going to propose a budget to Congress to balance the deficit, and most of the time this is an empty promise. So it's important for you to see how they suggest that they're going to convince Congress to accept their proposal and follow through with what they recommend. Okay, tax reform policies. Prior to Ronald Reagan, and during the beginning of his administration, there were 14 different income brackets. And so when Ronald Reagan comes in, he reduces these 14 different brackets into 2 and tries to make it tries to deregulate those different categories. And overall, you have these 2 different categories of I shouldn't say categories. You have these 2 different types of taxation. You have a flat tax where everybody pays the same, and then you have a progressive tax. And with the progressive taxation, the more money that you make, the greater percentage of the tax would be. There's also a theory of regressive taxation, and so the more money that you make, the less percentage of your overall income will be taxed. With President George H.W. Bush and with President Clinton, when they came in after Reagan, they actually added 2 more brackets and moved our economy into a more progressive style of taxation. When George W. Bush comes in, he encouraged Congress to pass a lot of different tax breaks, and so he reduced the revenues. There was an economic downturn. Homeland defense, military expenses kind of compounded everything. We were, going into Afghanistan and to Iraq, and so it was kind of this perfect storm. When W. Bush's last budget was proposed, it was over $1 trillion in deficit. So when Obama comes in, the deficit continues to grow, and that's where we are now. The latest budget proposals you could have heard in the presidential State of the Union address that we still haven't got to talk about yet. So I hope that you guys got to watch that and see what the president was suggesting to Congress. Okay. One thing, though, is in 2012, President Obama did campaign to restore the 39.6 tax bracket for the highest tax bracket. I want to try to breeze over some things for you to try to condense this because I know that I'm getting really long. I will say that as bad as things look in the United States, the thing that we do have going for us, there's a couple of different things. Since the 1950s, the tax burden on individual U.S. citizens has decreased. Okay, so that's one thing that's positive. The other thing that's positive is that our individual tax burden is not as great as compared to individuals in other democratic nations. We are not taxed as heavily. So if you compare us to the United Kingdom, to Canada, other places like that, the taxes are going to be greater. A lot of that is, you'll hear people say, because of national health care and different types of social programs. And we can have that discussion in class about the pros and cons of weighing that out, and even looking at some things where we can evaluate the whether or not that payout is worthwhile. Okay. Let's close by talking a little bit about iniquity, pluralist versus majoritarian perspectives when it comes to the economy. Um, as far as government payments going to individuals, it doesn't always go to the poor. So, with farm programs as an example, I think that's one of the things that Janda discusses. The wealthiest farmers are often the ones that are going to receive the largest subsidies. Make sure that you understand what subsidies are. We'll talk about that on Monday if you do not. Um, National tax policies at all levels have historically favored groups of people with the highest incomes and the wealthiest. And so, at the beginning of one of the earlier chapters, when you saw the little vignette about we are the 99%, that's that's what that's talking about. The Wall Street movement, Occupy Wall Street movement. That's what that was in response to. The effects of taxing and spending policies over time is that poor citizens are going to pay higher percentages of income and taxes than our wealthier citizens. And in capitalist system, some degree of inequality is inevitable. That's the way that it works. Just consider this: if you are a millionaire and we have a progressive tax system, and you have the funds available to move somewhere else into a nation that has a tax system that's going to be more beneficial to you, would you stay in the United States or would you move to that other country? And that's what we're seeing more and more: millionaires and billionaires moving out of the United States because of that. And so the tricky part is to figure out a way to still maintain some type of equity and equal treatment, um, where the government is providing, protecting, and providing for the general welfare, but at the same time making sure that we don't have the people who could potentially create those jobs move out of the United States. And something actually, kind of on a side note, if you do a Google search for Warren Buffett, um, dumping subsidies or dumping domestic stocks, you'll see that a lot of billionaires over the past few weeks have been getting rid of their United States holdings. So I want you to check that out and see what the underlying cause might be. Should we be worried? Okay, finally, thinking about McKinsey's article in her Hot Topic last Wednesday, what she said from the article that she was citing is that the top 1% now has $110 trillion, has which would be 65 times as much as the lower bottom half of the world. This isn't just the United States; this would be the whole world. So this would guide us into this conversation of democracy and equality. So the United States definitely uh, prizes ourselves on political equality, but not so much on economical equality. And there's lots of different reasons why. We can debate these in class too. This wouldn't be the right place for me since I'm just kind of talking to you. But the wealthiest 1% controls 35% of household wealth in the United States. And distribution among ethnic groups is definitely one-sided. So you have typically white families, annual income being 1.5%, 1.5 times higher than black or Hispanic families. And one theory to this is that pluralist interest groups, they distort government's efforts to promote equality because they're trying to provide for everyone. And so, if you think back to political pluralism, the same effect happens with economic pluralism. If you look at a Gallup poll from 1985 to 2008, the clear majority said that distribution of wealth is not fair. It doesn't favor. They favor some type of redistribution, but not through taxes on the richest bracket for the reasons that I just mentioned. They'll leave if we do. Majoritarians would say that Americans don't really understand the economy. They don't understand the iniquities of our national tax system, and so we shouldn't be leaving it to the common man to make those decisions. It should be the government that makes those decisions because they understand the ins and outs. And so therein again, you have the problem. So This is me trying to run through Chapter 17 of Janda and a few of the other Khan Academy videos that have recommended that you watch this week. So by opening up that Word document that's in my Unit 5 wiki page, you're going to see the activities for the days of this week. Remind you again about the Quizlet vocab gadget or widget that I have at the bottom of the wiki page. Also, don't forget about your Directing a Better World justification that will be due next Friday, along with your annotated bibliography. So individual justification, 200 to 300 words. Group annotated bibliography, at least 8 citations with your summary of the article and your evaluation of the article. Goodness, I know this is a lot, but you guys can do it. So, if I don't see you this week, I will see you Monday, and we'll get cracking on domestic policy. So guys, stay safe, stay warm, and I will talk to you soon.